So let me talk about the leader, what we call the leader style, ENTJs, ESTJs, and for INTJs and ISTJs, it's their second function. So this function is rooted in the left rational brain, okay? And it is the part of the brain we use for defining. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? Where is it going to be done? So it's about defining, planning, organizing, structuring. You get the idea. So the predominant need of this style, of the ENTJs and the ESTJs, is the need to be in control. Now, if you're watching this and you're in a relationship with someone of this particular style or personality type, you're going to know what I'm talking about, because you'll say, that's exactly it. They have a need to be in control. Now, this is without judgment. So I don't want you saying, well, they shouldn't need that. This is, as I said earlier, it's hardwired. It is psychological. That need is there. It's in them. It is the fuel to their behavior. It's what allows them to be incredibly successful. It is what allows them to achieve things. It's what allows them to be confident and, you know, just all of those things that are their strengths. But when you have a need to be in control like this style does, it also shows up in the relationships in a number of different ways, okay? So when we talk about these needs, we're not judging them as being right or wrong or good or bad. It just simply is, right? And we know this and we understand it. And the need that is behind all of the behavior of a leader, an ENTJ, ESTJ, is that need to be in control. So what does that mean in their relationships? Well, first off, they take charge. They take charge, they make decisions, they want to be the one in the relationship who is making those decisions, and they expect the people that are in the relationships, whether they be lovers or friends or co-workers, essentially to follow their lead, okay? They have very high expectations, and they define the expectations for those relationships that they are in, and they will criticize people when they don't do what they believe they should be doing, okay? They prefer activities, and this is really important. Their preference in their relationships is to have it activity-based. So it's very purpose-driven, task-driven, role-focused, right? That is the approach they take. They don't like they don't want to go deep into emotional intimacy, and they can be considered emotionally distant and contained for that reason, okay? But again, bottom line, in that relationship, they need to be in charge, they want to give advice, and they want to be productive with others, okay? And so you see them out. I always laugh. So my uncle is this style, and you can see him. He's always organizing activities, whether it's golf or whether it's bridge or whether it's fundraising or community activities. There's always some activity behind the relationship. You don't just get together to get together. There's some underlying activity or purpose or intent behind it, and that's how you stay in that relationship. And it's meaningful to them because of that meets their need to have purpose-driven relationships. So when we come down another level and talk about, I said earlier, there are things that will satisfy people in the relationship, and that they need to have that there and present in order for them to feel satisfied. And what I'm going to focus on in the training today is what we call the need dissatisfiers. So these are types of interactions, conversations, or activities that you can have with others that would actually thwart that predominant need. These are things that if they are present in their lives, it is going to make it really hard for them to feel satisfied in their relationships. So if you're a leader style, if these things are present, if these conditions are present, you're more likely to be irritated easily, depressed, angered, frustrated, without always knowing why. You might even be inclined to pick fights or engage in what we call non-productive or self-protective behaviors, right? And that allow you to direct the energy towards getting that need met, that need to be in control in whatever way you can, as opposed to shifting to satisfy, to get those need satisfiers, or get rid of the need dissatisfiers and get those need satisfiers in place for you, okay? So there are three really important ones that I want you to understand about this style. Again, whether this is you and your approach to relationships, or whether this is someone that that you're in a relationship with, be it your boss, as I said, a co-worker, even that, could even be a child, right? If you have a child with this style, these are still important things to understand. The three biggest dissatisfiers for the need to be in control when it comes to this style in their relationships is, one, is emotionally driven dialogue, okay? They are inherently and naturally emotionally contained, Okay, they prefer to control their emotions, and so having to spend a lot of time in emotionally driven dialogue, in that heightened level of emotionality, of talking through their feelings and talking about someone else's feelings or their emotional experiences, is really dissatisfying for them. Okay. The other thing that is a huge dissatisfier in relationships for this style is having to depend on someone else. Whether you're depending on someone else to make the plan, to make the decision, to make the money, to set things up, to get something done, that need, there's a constant need where you are depending on others in order to be living out your life and living out your relationships. That is going to be a huge dissatisfier. It can actually cause depression. It can cause anxiety, in addition to those feelings of frustration and irritation, and also in addition to the fact that we start shifting into self-protective behaviors that can be really destructive to our relationships, again, be it at work or at home, okay? And the third big dissatisfier for this style is a lack of plans and decisions. They can't tolerate things not being planned and not being decided. Again, because it frustrates their need to be in control. I remember going so far as to one day just sitting around the house with my ex-husband, and he's like, so what's the plan? And I said, I don't know. I don't, my personal space, I don't tend to plan as much as I do in my work life. And so sometimes if you just have a day off, right, you just kind of want to hang. And he would literally say to me, so the plan is to do nothing until we decide to make a new plan to do something. Like that, by saying that, by putting that out there, it's like the plan is to do nothing. And to me, you don't plan to do nothing. But in his mind, the absence of the plan was really stressful. It was anxiety producing for him, and it made him really anxious from that place that his need to be in control was not being satisfied. And so because of that, he had to figure out a way to get back into control. And as soon as I said, yeah, the plan is to do nothing for the next 3 hours, he's like, oh, okay. Because he had a plan, right? He had a plan, it was decided, and he knew, right? And this is how, again, it's unconscious for us. If we're not aware of it, we're not aware of it, where it's coming from. And I remember at the time feeling irritated about, why are you asking me what the plan is, right? It's like, why do we have to have a plan? Why can't we just have a day without a plan? But because his need was to be in control, and part of being in control is about having a plan and having a decision about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I don't have that need, because I don't have a need to be in control. So again, we frustrate our spouse's needs. We frustrate the needs of others when we don't understand and appreciate it. And once I started to understand about him, and I do it with my son, because my son has this as his second, is here's the plan, here's what it's going to look like, because I can always see when he's starting to kind of wind up, when there is no plan and no clarity about what it is that's going on. So again, if you think about it, if you're dependent on someone else to make the decision about the plan and they're not planning and deciding, it's like a double dissatisfier in there, right? Because those were the top three. So emotionally driven dialogue, having to depend on others, and a lack of plan and decisions are the key need dissatisfiers. How do we know? How do we know that if I'm a leader, how do I know that my needs are being frustrated? How do I know that there's something going on in my relational context that is keeping me from feeling satisfied? Or how do I know that if I'm in a relationship, again, be it with a colleague or at work or family, that has this as their style, how do I know that something is going on for them that is causing their needs to not be satisfied? Well, there's some really easy cues to pick up on. So here's just a few that you can watch for in your relationships as a leader or as someone in a relationship with a leader. First of all, they can move into being really arrogant and overpowering, intimidating in their attempts to control people, right? So if they're feeling out of control, one of the things they will do is assert themselves, and sometimes in a very aggressive way, in order to get back in control of the people around them, right? They could get really angry with people, right, in order to shut people down. I mean, I've seen clients of mine start to bully their staff in order to feel like they're back in control, right? And so it's just understanding that as they will move into action, and that action can be quite overpowering of the other individual and cause the other individuals to shut down. They can be married to their work. They can neglect their relationships, and they can use their work as an excuse to avoid intimacy in order to feel comfortable. They don't like feeling vulnerable, so work can be their place to go where they don't have to feel vulnerable, and it can keep them away from, or it can cause them to neglect their relationships in that focus on achievement where they really feel like they're in control, because it's harder for them to feel in control in their relationships. They will make decisions and rules about how things should be done and expect people to just follow, right? Just expect people to follow. And they can be really critical of others' viewpoints and others' ideas, or even sometimes others' competence, right? It's again, they go into that place of I know and I know best, and I'm going to tell you what's best. And I remember, I'll just use another story from my ex because he was so illustrative of this. He used to make these comments of, well, in Mike's world, and that was self-referring to him, because he had this whole thing in his head about how you should load a dishwasher and how you should do this and how you should do that, and everything was this set of rules, and if people didn't follow those, if people didn't behave according to those, and again, they weren't written down, they weren't communicated, they were just rules that allowed him to control his world, to control his environment, and to control the people around him that were in it. Okay. They see emotion as weakness, and so that causes them to control their emotions. So when you see them hyper controlling their emotions, they can be dismissive of the emotions of others, or make fun of them, or tell people they shouldn't feel that way. Again, it's that they'll go into that place because they don't have the tolerance. Emotions make them feel out of control. So that's a trigger for them to shift into those self-protective behaviors. They can cause other people to be dependent on them because they make all the decisions. And we see this in organizations all the time, but we also see it in relationships where people, whether it's male or female, of this style, where they make all the decisions. Their spouses can't decide anything without checking in with them first, right? And it doesn't matter what the income balance is. It doesn't matter what the sort of anything to do with those sorts of things. It really just because they have that need and they move to control and they make people dependent on them. We see it in organizations, especially when people at the top of the organization don't delegate down authority, they don't delegate down decision making, and even little decisions having to go up to the CEO, and that's a clear sign that you've got a leader, an ENTJ or an ESTJ at the top of the organization, because they can't tolerate letting go of control and building up people's capabilities underneath them. Okay, they don't ask for help. It's also an important thing to know that even if they're struggling, they're not going to ask for help. Again, they're just going to move to control it. So competitive, argumentative, they have to win. They need to be right, and they need to win. Now, this is only when they're being self-protective, right? So I don't want to make you say, well, you don't want to have a relationship with these folks. There's a flip side of their strengths where they're incredible, they're fun, they're charismatic, they can be really charming, they can, again, they can bring crowds around them and groups around them, and they have a way too sometimes of building community within, sort of their social environment or their family environment, and making friends and keeping friends. So there's a lot of relationship strengths here, but I'm talking about what's the pattern of self-protective behavior that you see. And when they shift into that place of needing to be right and needing to win and being really impatient and impulsive in their interactions, because they just feel that bias and that urge to do something in order to take action. These are self-protective behaviors. These are when you're observing this about yourself, if this is your style, if you're observing this about others that you're in relationships with that have this as their style, this is your cue, or these are your cues that tell you that this individual is working from their self-protective system. So you have to step back and say, okay, well, what needs are not being satisfied, or what dissatisfiers are present in their environment, and what can we do in our relationship in order to make it different. There are tips. The tips are really important, whether this is your style or you're in a relationship with someone with this style, again, personally or professionally. When you come at it from the how do I support them to meet their needs, you are going to get their best self back. Okay, so you are going to work with them in order to keep them from shifting into their self-protective system. And when it comes to the people that are in a relationship with you, if they understand this about you and they understand these tips, they can also come into that relationship in a way that makes sure that your needs are being met. Okay, because when our needs are met, we're happier, we're more satisfied, we're moving into self-actualization, and we're ultimately in our relationships really thriving, and that sets the foundation to allow us to become who we are meant to be. So in terms of tips, be clear, define what you want, okay? Define what you want in the relationship. What are your expectations? What are their expectations? Make sure that there is clear and crystal definition around how you are coming together. If it's in a workplace, how is that going to work? If you're in-laws, you know, sort of what's the expectation on them? What's the expectation on you, right? Bring that level of clarity, because we are going to get the best outcomes in the relationship when we do that. Avoid blindsiding them, okay? Don't put something in front of them that they haven't had time to think about or come to a conclusion, especially if you're doing it in front of other people. Give them time to digest things to get back in control. For some of you who have done the imposter syndrome training with me, and you've heard me tell my story about telling my ex I wanted to go to Hawaii and him saying no, 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 because I blindsided him. There was no, you know, there was no lead up to it. There was no kind of planting of seeds. There was nothing. It was just full on. And again, because it makes them feel out of control, they get back in control by saying no or shutting it down or overpowering the other person, okay? If they're coming home from a long day at work where they've been working logically all day, don't expect them to walk in that door and do a deep dive into listening to your emotions, okay? They need time to transition. And also because they're very role driven, you got to give them time to transition from, you know, work hat, change their hat, from, you know, work hat into, you know, spouse hat, right? So give them that time in that space, and don't, you know, especially if you sort of when waiting, and again, this is not gender-based, this is based on personality, that, you know, they need that time to make that transition, right? And allowing them to do that to where they're in control of that transition is you're going to have a better conversation with them. If you, again, kind of blindside or push them right into it, their need to be in control is going to get triggered, and they're more likely to shut it down or not listen, or, you know, sort of give you that sort of, here, just go do this sort of dismissal, okay? If you're having to talk about issues in the relationship, if you're talking about your needs for intimacy, do it logically. Come at it from a fact-based perspective, okay? Trying to come up with, you know, here are the facts, here's the evidence. So less about it from emotional language and more about what's the actual issue and what are some of the options that we have for resolving that issue, okay? Allow them to lead where it's not important to you. This is probably one of the biggest learnings, mistakes that I made in my relationship, not understanding it. I never thought about, because I don't have a need to be in control, but not in this kind of way, but in that way of I'm always working to create something that I see in my mind, and so I do to a degree. And in my first marriage, my approach, even though it seemed really collaborative, at the end of the day, I was the one that was making most of the decisions. And I could see those places where, you know, we hadn't carved off really clear places and spaces for my ex to be in charge and in control, and in charge and in control of the things he wanted to be in charge and in control of. You know, I gave him the things that I didn't want to be in charge and control of, but it wasn't enough to satisfy him. And so having to negotiate that, having to be really clear about that, and trying to forge that if you can, again, role driven, but also that need to be in control at the end of it, okay? And last but not least, this style will lose control emotionally. And when they do lose emotional control, it is usually a way of getting back in control, but you need to give them some space to recover from that, okay? So let them go, let them have that time, because it is very distressing for them when they actually lose emotional control, because they recognize it is, in the moment, it might have gotten them back in control, but it's not actually allowing them to truly get their need for control to be met. And so you just give them some time and some space when they lose that emotional control.